Hola, buenas noches mi gente, ¿cómo se encuentran? Me llamo Alba Mar, me pueden decir Alba en este canal Seriela donde hablamos de libros y algunos en español desde Puerto Rico. Good evening everybody, how are you doing? My name is Alba Mar, you may call me Alba. The channel is Seriela and we're here to talk about books, some of them in Spanish from Puerto Rico. And let's get going because I don't want to take a long time tonight. I want to give you a little update on what's been happening in March as far as reading is concerned. And we're going to start with the Puerto Rican books that are in English, they're not in Spanish. And we're going to start with the Nationalist Heroines by Olga Jimenez de Wagenheim, who has divided the book, it's a nonfiction book, about women who are nationalist heroines. The first part of the book, she deals with Doña Dominga Cruz. Look it up here. Dominga de la Cruz Becerril. She lived from 1909 to 1981. And she was famous because she rescued the Puerto Rican flag during the Ponce Massacre of 1937, in which 19 unarmed people were killed on, I think it was on a Palm Sunday in Ponce, Puerto Rico. And but before she starts talking about Doña Dominga, Professor Olga Jimenez de Wagenheim, she's a professor emeritus of history in Rutgers University. She starts off with a very succinct, concise, brief history of Puerto Rico so that, you know, we might have a little bit of context to why these women would feel motivated to sacrifice their lives and their livelihood for the cause of independence. I read the first part already about Dominga de la Cruz. It was very moving and sad and tragic childhood and youth that she had. She was born into a very poor family, and she was orphaned at a very young age and was sent to live with a godmother who later on passed away herself. So she, at a very young age, was left to fend for herself and for her siblings. So, as many young women did in those days, she married very, very young to another poor man, had 2 daughters. Her husband abandoned the family, and she was left with her 2 little girls who finally died of hunger, malnutrition. So Doña Dominga was left on her own, and she went to live in Mayagüez, where she first worked in as a seamstress, and she said it was very, very difficult under very harsh conditions. They would work very long hours until very, very late at night. Hardly had any food. But in that brief period in which she was brought up by her godmother taught her how to read. And so at some point in her life, she became una lectora. She became a reader for tobacco workers. And it is known in countries in which tobacco is produced that rolling the tobaccos and the cigars is a very laborious and boring job. And what some people would do, they would contract a reader to read newspapers, novels, articles, philosophy, and this is what Dominga did for a while. And that is how she came to learn about Don Pedro Albizu Campo, and that's how she became a nationalist, and that's how she wound up at the Ponce massacre. And that's a picture of the police massacring innocent people that day on a Palm Sunday. The Nationalists had obtained permission to march that day and even to celebrate Mass, but it was rescinded at the last moment. But they decided to march anyway, and because they decided to march, the police opened fire. Doña Dominga, during that scuffle in the Ponce massacre, she saw one of her comrades falling. One of the comrades who was carrying the flag, and she remembered that in the nationalist meetings they had said that the flag should never touch the ground. So she put her life in danger and collected the flag, and so that's why she is remembered in Puerto Rican history among the nationalists. And she died in Cuba, as a matter of fact, because despite the fact that she was a nonviolent person who never had any guns in her life, she was followed by the authorities, and until she finally left the island and passed away in Cuba. Then I continued reading with the other book on Puerto Rico. Remember, I told you I was going to be reading Reconsidering the Insular Cases, the Past and Future of the American Empire. I was reading this because United States citizenship was bestowed on Puerto Rico on March the 2nd, 1917, if I'm not mistaken, just before World War I, conveniently. And so I decided, well, let's read about the insular cases. And what I found very interesting about this book is essentially a compilation of the speeches and the panel discussions that were held in a conference at Harvard Law School on February 19th of 2014, in which the insular cases were discussed. Now, the insular cases are Supreme Court cases that have to do with the status of the territories. And the Supreme Court, in a series of over 21 different cases, came to construct what became our nebulous status as an unincorporated territory. And it goes into the different cases in detail. Now, what struck me as I read this was I became very frustrated because I'm an elderly person. I'm a grandmother already. And this is the first time that I've read such a fleshed out account of the struggle for autonomy under the Spaniards. I remember when I took my first course in Puerto Rican history at the University of Puerto Rico, and we were led to read, for example, Bolívar Pagán, and my eyes would glaze over because it was a dry repetition to me of one party being formed after another. One party would die, another one would form, coalitions would come, alliances would go, and it was dizzying. But there was very little historical context. And that was the case for all these years. And so that's why Puerto Rican history is so important to me, because you get it piecemeal. There is no one place where you can go. I guess same thing happens with history around the world. There's nowhere you can go and get a comprehensive look of what was happening. Now, in chapter 1, Christina Duffy Ponsa, she's a George Wellward Murray Professor of Legal History at Columbia Law School. She goes into the reasons why she claims that autonomistas, the people who are looking for autonomy in the 19th century in Puerto Rico, why they were so willing to switch almost automatically their loyalties from Spain to the United States after the invasion. And I was a little, not all Puerto Ricans switched their loyalties, from one moment to the next. So, but as I kept on reading, I was impressed by the amount of history that she gave on what was happening in Europe and why what was happening in Europe was important, and how long the autonomists in Puerto Rico, the reformists in Puerto Rico, had been struggling and going to Spain, that long trip, going to Spain to lobby for reforms, for economic reforms, for land reforms, for social reforms, since 1809. And the Spanish government would make promises and never come through on their promises. Because, why? Because they were going through turmoil also. Because Napoleon invaded Spain. And at one point, all that was left of Spain under Napoleon was Cadiz. And I'm learning all of this right now. So, yeah. It's been very, very eye-opening to me. Of course, I don't accept her generalization that all Puerto Ricans wanted statehood. She explains also that according to the reformists, according to the autonomists, they considered statehood under the United States to be a form of autonomy, states' rights and all that. So, but they were disillusioned quite rapidly. First of all, under the military government that was established here for 2 years. And then when the Supreme Court started handing down the insular cases, the decisions in the insular cases, they came to realize that the United States was not going to incorporate the islands, the territories that they had acquired as war booty in the Spanish-American War. So, I had told you that I was really looking forward to reading Judge Juan R. Torruella, because he was the keynote speaker at that conference. And his keynote speech is Chapter 4, The Insular Cases, a declaration of their bankruptcy, and my Harvard pronouncement. Okay, and so he talks about how they're flawed. You have to remember that this is the Supreme Court that handed down Plessy versus Ferguson. Separate but equal. Yeah, it's that same Supreme Court. And this is the same Supreme Court that said it would be unwise to give the ignorant and lawless brigands that infest Puerto Rico the benefits of the Constitution. And that was the constitutional questions incident to the acquisition and government by the United States of island territory. This was an article written in the Harvard Law Review by Simeon E. Baldwin in 1899. So those were the sentiments that were common during that time with that court. And then Torruella goes on to explain why Puerto Rico is a colony. Yeah, and he keeps repeating it. Let me digress a moment and explain why Puerto Rico's relationship to the United States is a colonial one, regardless of the label that we may use. And then he goes on to explain what UNESCO's Dictionary of Social Sciences defines as a colony. And all of that definition applies to Puerto Rico. This is according to Juan R. Torruella. This isn't me saying this. This is Juan R. Torruella, who is a federal judge sitting in the First District Court of Appeals in Boston. Yeah. So there are all sorts of different kind of cases. There are tax cases and criminal cases and all sorts of cases. But they come down to the same conclusion, that we are an unincorporated territory that doesn't have the same rights under the U.S. Constitution as the states do. And what does Torruella suggest for this? He says, given the prospect of the continuation of our interminable status quo, Puerto Ricans may reasonably come to believe that the time has come to take some more noticeable action than in the past, because there exists and has existed a major civil rights issue that has been lingering for more than 100 years and does not seem to get resolved by the exercise of only patience and good manners. Political correctness. Respectability politics. One step that the U.S. citizens of Puerto Rico may consider is gradually engaging in time-honored civil rights actions, of which there are many successful examples. One that comes to mind, because economics, that is hitting the pocketbook, seems to bring about results, is the use of economic boycotts to attract attention to ongoing civil rights violations. Yes. Yes. Yeah. So I'm already halfway through this book. It's very, very interesting series of different articles having to do with the insular cases. And you can tell where people are coming from. There's a whole spectrum here of different political stances, and there's a whole spectrum here. But I found especially Judge Torruella's opinion very thought-provoking. Yeah, so that's another one that I have to finish, along with the Nationalist Heroines. And then I'm reading halfway through Pride and Prejudice. Oh, The Mystery Madness. I haven't started this yet. This is the only one that I have in Spanish for this month. El Corazon de Voltaire is supposed to be a mystery novel. I haven't read it yet, but I will. I'll get to it eventually. I'm halfway through Jane Austen. I'm up to date with Pride and Prejudice, and I'm enjoying it. I think I might finish it ahead of time because it's hard to hold myself back. Then I'm reading Three Souls. Not reading. I'm listening through an audiobook. And this one I am doing a lot better because there's no accent. I'm not multitasking. I'm concentrating on the audiobook. And it's going very well. It's the story of, there are three souls, right? And the three souls belong to the deceased main character. And the novel is essentially a flashback of what happened to her and how she came to die, right? And it's a very interesting story because it's as if her spirit, her ghost, is remembering, is witnessing. She's like a witness to everything that has happened in her life. And her three souls, her yin, her yang, and her hung, I think, have conversations with her. And each one of those souls has a very distinct personality. And I'm really enjoying it. And it's also like a mystery. So another one for this month, on the 24th of March, is when Archbishop Oscar Romero was assassinated during Mass in El Salvador. And I'm going to read at least a few of his homilies that are found in this book. The foreword is by Henri Nouwen. So, yeah, I'm going to get to that one. And I have to get to Just Mercy. Haven't started it yet, but I will. And I have to get to Signal to Noise. Haven't started it yet, but I will. And really fast, I knew this was going to happen. I'm moving slowly but surely. I am progressing in my mammoth for the month of March, which is At Canaan's Edge. Now, you know I've had this on my TBR since January for Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. And if I have to keep going until the anniversary of his assassination, I will. Because in the newbie tag, I told you that I was raised in the inner city and I went to a black elementary school. I had black teachers, and this was before Black History Month. We only